Jerome Powell just said the quiet parts out loud. And this from the Fed at the Jackson Hole meeting was absolutely legendary in not the good sense, because there's going to be a lot of changes supposedly being made here in the very near future. So what does this mean about monetary policy and the Fed not being swayed by politics here in the near future? We're going to dive into all of this. But first, let's dive into what Jerome Powell said and break down his entire Jackson Hole meeting, because he said that the Fed has adopted a new framework that removes a reference to the central bank seeking inflation that averages the 2% over time. I mean, can you believe it, folks? We are now saying that the 2% inflation target, which was arbitrary, let me mind you, at the beginning, that they're going to be changing this arbitrary number. Oh, we're going to shift it a little bit farther up, farther up, farther up. Well, would you looky here, folks? They keep moving the bar on inflation and just moving it back, 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 back. Not like we're on the warning track in a baseball game, but it's ridiculous because the Fed is suggesting that the current conditions may warrant interest rate cuts. Now, we've seen Jerome Powell and Donnie T essentially go at it publicly, right? The famous hard hat meeting where, Trump pulls it out, this piece of paper, and says, you know what, the Fed is way overspending on not only everything, but also the renovations of their building. And now, essentially, Powell is opening up the door saying, hey, we are going to cut interest rates. There's, a good environment for that here going forward. This is all we need, just a little push. Inflation isn't going anywhere, right? But it's absolutely crazy because now we got the Fed suggesting that there may warrant interest rate cuts and saying that the inflation target was 2% and not 3%, that they might be shifting to this 3% target is absolutely crazy, right? I mean, look at this right here. This is from AI here just a few, earlier today, raising that it's not, they might not be shifting that. It's incorrect. But from the Fed speech literally from here today, inflation expectations could move up, dragging actual inflation with them. Inflation has been above our target for more than 4 years and remains a prominent concern for households and businesses. Measures of long-term inflation expectations, however, as reflected in the market and survey-based measures, see, this is a problem right there, survey-based measures, appear to remain well anchored and consistent to our long-term inflation objective of 2%. Yeah. Like, we all believe that one, right? It's absolutely criminal what these guys are doing here, where they're telling you, hey, you know what? Don't worry about inflation. But let's dive in and break down Jackson Hole, because everybody has been saying, hey, you know what? This is Jerome Powell's last, big meeting and discussion before he's going to be leaving that Fed chair. And I know everybody's like, oh, leaving the Fed chair. He's not going to get fired, right? I mean, Donald Trump is going to, keep threatening all of this for the political theater, but I don't actually think he's going to come through with it. It would get really hairy if he actually did. But let's break down the themes that we saw from the Jackson Hole meeting today. So since its inception in 1978, the Federal Reserve of Kansas City has grown into the premier forum of shaping this global monetary policy. So the discussion this year was around inflation, employment, and the direction of the U.S. monetary policy, right? So we got inflation, where the Fed signaled that they may cut rates soon, even as these inflation risks remain, right? So, hey, you know what? It's the tariffs. Shifting of the balance risks may warrant adjusting our policy stance. Referencing his concern about weaker job gains and more direct sign that the Fed is considering a rate cut that he has made in previous comments. Still, Powell suggests that the Fed will proceed carefully in the coming months. But we all know that Donald Trump has essentially been coming at Jerome Powell's neck here publicly. So because he's been doing all of this, and we see it time and time and time again, well, this interesting aspect of all of this is what we're seeing, Jay Powell and the likes of these guys now start to really back down to Donald Trump. And even though the Fed is supposed to be politically agnostic, we are starting to see this ramp up, right? Hey, the inflation, it's been above the Fed's target for longer than 4 years, right? Who was in office prior? Everybody's been saying, oh, you know what? It's Donald Trump, it's the tariffs, it's all these things. Look, the facts are there. It's been above that 2% target for longer than 4 years. Somebody else was in office prior. So, I mean, you know what? Donald Trump hasn't done anything to lower those CPI numbers. And I personally don't think that, lowering interest rates is going to help on either side. So both parties here potentially are here to blame, right? I mean, I know some of you guys, we got the trolls in there who love to hit that dislike button, might not like that comment, but it's, the reality is the government isn't coming here to save you, folks. So the stability of unemployment rate and other labor market measures allows us to proceed carefully as we consider changes to our policy stance. That suggests that the Fed will continue to evaluate jobs and inflation data as it decides whether to cut interest rates. So now the Fed is saying that its policy framework may be needing to go to more traditional footing. Well, what is this traditional footing that Jay Powell and company is talking about, right? That means it would need to move away from the pandemic era approach that emphasized employment over inflation. The new framework reinstates a focus on flexible inflation target and aiming the balance of Fed's dual mandate and price stability. So let's go over it, right? We've got the potential of the interest rate cuts coming here in September. The considerations arise due to the softening labor market. Now, if you look at the overall market, the market is pricing in 2 rate cuts. Previously, it was pricing in 3. So we're starting to see that, right? So, the Fed is at least going to cut 1. So we'll see where the market kind of goes from here, but it is pretty interesting to see this start to take off. And then we see the shift and the U.S. market. We're going to get into how the market's reacting here in a minute. But the last point is Powell reaffirmed that the Federal Reserve's commitment to making policy-based decisions on economic data independent of political influence. This statement came amid public criticism from former President Trump, who had previously expressed dissatisfaction with the Fed's policy and personnel. So what happened here and then in this 24 hours with, this new CME group? Well, last time I came to you guys, there was a 75% chance of the Fed cutting interest rates. We saw that actually jump up 10% here to now an 85% chance. So now with Powell's comments, we're seeing it more likely than not, and an increase in that the Fed is actually going to cut interest rates. But what did we see here, which is very interesting? We saw the Dixie fall off a cliff when Powell suggested that they're going to cut interest rates. I mean, look at this giant red candle that we have here. I mean, my goodness, folks. This thing just absolutely plummeted and fell off a cliff. And that's because they all know what we've been seeing, right? The Fed and the US dollar, the Dixie, inflation still isn't under wraps. Even though we have employment numbers that are, staggering a little bit, inflation still not under control. So we need to potentially look at the Dixie as a sign of investors worried about how, we're gonna see inflation pan out. Inflation is not slowing down. It is creeping up and staying stagnant. And then all of this, right? The market was like, oh, Powell is going to cut interest rates. So because Powell is going to cut interest rates, all this money is going to flow directly into the market. Now, look, this is not financial advice for you guys, but I fully believe that when everybody starts believing one thing is going to happen, the opposite does. The market loves to just mess with some people. So when we see Powell eventually start to cut interest rates, I think a lot of people are just going to look at that and say, hey, you know what? We're looking at, hey, this market reaction here. The U.S. Treasury yields are dropping off a cliff and the Dixie went down. But when we start to get, the Fed really locking in these rates, well, that's when we'll get a little bit of hairy here. And we see the Dixie falling off the ledge. So, I mean, this is where, you guys who have been coming to this channel, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button for me. Because I know 95% of you guys are not subscribed. So I would love to get that number closer to 50-50. Anyway, regardless, you guys know that when I keep coming to this channel, that I keep talking about the risks of an asset bubble inflation, right? Like we've got just massive amounts of inflation coming left and right, left and right. And then, we see the Dixie fall off a cliff, but we see, the green candles come out on the SPY, on the S&P 500, all of these different indexes, they really start to pump. So that's going to continue. As All Nighter Hider is saying, make sure you guys are smoking that like and hitting that sub button. We got McLovin. We got 5 of you guys in the chat here. Thank you guys for popping in. Keep telling a friend to tell a friend, because we're going to be diving into more of this as the market develops. There's soon to be a bunch of different reactions that are going to be coming out of everything that we see from the Federal Reserve, right? Everybody's going to be reading into everything, every little detail, right? As we're coming to month's end, September is getting very close. We've got less than a month until the potential of this rate cut. So there's going to be a ton to cover. So make sure you guys are hitting that sub button and with the bell notification, so you can join the chat with these two grand chaps here. And I will catch you guys all at the next one.